Hey everyone, how are you doing today? Paul here. I'm so excited to spend the next few moments with all of you today. I pray that this time together would be both meaningful, would be empowering, and would be very relevant for your life right now. I have a message for you today that I really feel and believe that is from the Lord. And it's simply called Faith in the Storm. It's called Faith and the Storm, and it basically about navigating through the fears that we have when the storms of life come. I remember years back, I was in school in Pennsylvania, and I was driving back on the weekends. And this particular time, I was driving back, and I had at the time it was a GPS unit. It was when units had just come out, and they're like kind of a big deal. And took it, and I was following it back home, and it had me take a few turns that I was unfamiliar with, and I made one right turn, another right, and then a left, and then another right, and then before I knew it, I found myself in the backwoods of Maryland, completely lost. And to add on to that, not only was I completely lost, but it was raining heavily, torrential downpour. I mean, rain like I have never to this day experienced before was just coming down unrelentingly, and there was tree branches that were falling down. There was almost like flood-like conditions that were going on. I remember at one point I was driving and a tree limb fell that was so massive the car couldn't go around, so I had to literally get out of the car and move the limb out of the road just so I can keep on driving. It was quite the hair-raising, scariest, one of the most scariest moments of my life. I saw the waters and the waters coming down, almost washing I had a very small vehicle at the time. And I remember at one point there's a Jeep coming the other way, and he stopped the car, he rolled his window down, and he said, "There's no way to pass." He says, "My car can't make it past that way. You probably should turn around." And at that point, I'm looking at his car. He has a massive Jeep, and I have this itty bitty little car. I'm like, if your car can't make it, my car definitely can't make it. And I've already been back where I've come from, and that was horrible. So I've gripped with immense fear in this situation, in this ordeal that I had been in. Maybe you've never faced that type of storm before in your life, but in this journey of life and in this journey of faith, we face many different types of storms, and these storms cause our hearts to at times be gripped and striked with fear. What's unique about my situation and your situation is that we're actually in a time in history, in a time in our city, in our nation, and in the globe when we are facing a storm here together. We're facing a storm that's larger than what we have ever experienced before. And so maybe you're here and you're struggling with fear, and your mind is racing into overdrive, and fear has had its way with your heart and with your mind and with your emotions. And so maybe you're struggling with fear related to maybe your employment situation, maybe where you're working at, maybe a job situation that you have, maybe your fear with your health, where your bodily health is and where it could potentially be. Maybe it's finances, maybe it's your family, maybe it's future conditions that are going on of you, and maybe what could be coming down the pike, but there's fear that often grips our heart. And so what I want to propose to you is important that whenever we face the storms of life, that we are able to stand firm in faith and not fear. That when we face the storms of life, we are enabled through God to stand firm in faith and not fear. And I want to look at the scriptures about a situation when something very similar to this happened, when the disciples and Jesus encountered a storm, a very severe storm, and looking at how they responded and how they were able to navigate through this. And I believe that this will be very relevant for your life. And so we're going to look at the Word of God and what it says here in Mark 4, verse 35. Mark 4, verse 35 is where we're going to start off here. It says here, Mark 4, verse 35, "On the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us cross over to the other side.'" I think that's just so profound. Let us cross over to the other side. Now, when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with them. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, So the waves, beat into the boat so that it was already filling. It was about to be submerged. But he was in the stern sleeping on a pillow. And they awoke him, and they said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Then he arose, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith?" Pay attention to that. Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? I want to kick off here in this passage that we have here. In verse 35, Jesus says something to them. He says, "Let us cross over to the other side." And so the first observation I have in this text that we have today is the promise. Jesus makes a promise to them. He says, "Let us cross over to the other side." Jesus had finished giving a series of teachings to the disciples and to people that were following him. And he made this promise to them saying, "Hey, let us cross over to the other side." And so they're followers of Jesus at this point. Jesus is leading them. I want you to keep that in here. They're following Jesus. Jesus is leading them, and he makes a promise to them that they will make it to the other side. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a wish, but it was a promise to make it to the other side. And maybe you're here today, and maybe you need to be reminded that Jesus will lead you to the other side. Maybe the other side is out of focus, out of sight. Maybe you can't even see it, buried in the situation that you may be experiencing right now. But Jesus promises you to lead you to the other side. And so we see they're following Jesus at this point. In verse 37 says, "A great windstorm arose and the waves beat into the boat." So they're following Jesus. It's evening time. It's dark. And the clouds set in. And there's rain and storm. And basically a very fierce storm sets in. And their boat is being filled with water. And this is complete panic mode. They're panicking. The boat is about to sink. Not only is the boat about to sink, but they're about to die in the middle of the sea. And so remember, again, they're following Jesus. This was Jesus leading them. So what do you do when you follow Jesus and the storm breaks out in your life? What do you do? What do you do when you are following Jesus, you're being faithful, you're following him, and the storm breaks out right before you? You see, when we live this life, when we walk this life, it's not a matter of if we will face the storm. It's really a matter of when we face the storm. Some may be caught surprised when they experience challenges throughout their life, but you may be saying, "I follow Jesus, I pray, I do the right things, I give, but why am I experiencing this storm in my life?" You see, following Jesus was never an evasion from the storm, but the ability to make it to the other side, standing firm in faith and not fear. Let me say that again. Following Jesus is not the evasion from the storm, but it's the ability to be empowered by faith to make it to the other side, And we see it throughout the scriptures. We see it in Abraham when he faced the storm of childlessness. We see it in Joseph when there was a storm of betrayal. We see it in David when there was the storm of his mentor and hero Saul literally hunting him down to kill him. There is the storm of the faithful Paul the apostle, the greatest missionary, being imprisoned and beaten over and over again in the storm of the imprisonment. You see, Jesus experienced storms even in his own life. So to think that we can live a life storm-free would be a far-fetched and unrealistic idea, because Jesus himself says in John 16:33, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation or trouble, but be of good fear. I have overcome the world." Jesus saying, hey, in this world that you're living, we will face storms. There are storms that we face, but he says, take heart. I've overcome, and you will overcome too. And I will make sure that you will get to the other side. And so he's reminding us of this. And so Jesus has empowered us, number one, to face the storm. Number two, to remove the storms, most often to go through the storms. So one is to face the storm. The other is to remove the storms. And the third is to go through the storms. And this all happens through the empowerment of God in and through our lives. And so we find ourselves here. The storm sets in. Jesus promises to make him to the other side. The storm sets in. And now where do you find Jesus in this story? You find Jesus finding a perfect time for a nap. Jesus finds the opportune time for a nap during the torrential downpour. Everyone's losing their mind. He goes to take a nap. He's sleeping. And my third observation is the invitation. So one is the promise. The second is the storm. The third is the invitation. They're fighting to keep their lives afloat, only to find Jesus sleeping. They're fighting and they're wrestling and they're trying to keep the boat afloat, taking water, maybe buckets of water, and just scooping it out and adjusting the sails, trying to make it, fighting for their lives, only to find Jesus sleeping. So what do you do when you're fighting to keep your boat afloat, but only to feel like Jesus is sleeping? How do you respond to that? What are your thoughts of that? When you're fighting to keep your boat afloat, your marriage afloat, your finances afloat, your health afloat, and it feels as if Jesus is sleeping, how do you respond to that? These disciples that were in the boat with Jesus woke him up. And they woke him up. And so what's so interesting about this is that even though Jesus was in their boat, he was not invited into their situation. Even though Jesus was in their boat, he was not invited into their situation. It was at the moment of them waking him up. Master, wake up. We are about to die out here. We find this situation where they invite him into their situation. Have you invited Jesus into the storm, the fear that you may be experiencing? Have you invited him? Have you welcomed his wisdom, his comfort, his counsel, his peace? Have you invited him into your situation? See, there was two invitations made in this story. I find it interesting that they woke up panicking, and they woke up Jesus in a panic, inviting him into their panic. But Jesus heard their invitation and he invited them into his peace. Sometimes we come to Jesus in times and we may be panicked and we may be not know how to come to him, and life may be falling apart and we may be panicking. But Jesus, when we invite him into our situation filled with fear, he invites us into his peace. And Jesus declared peace over that storm once he was invited into their situation. And so there was a young lady that I had a conversation with. This was years back, and she came to me and she said, Pastor, I'm going through all of these challenges in life. There's these big decisions coming up. I'm troubled here, and I've got to make this decision, and should I make this move? And really so much on this individual's life. And just like any loving pastor would do, I'm going down the options that are available. Should you do this? And what if you did this? And we're going back and forth. And I just had a moment where I just said, what have you heard God saying to you in your time of prayer? And she kind of looked at me funny, and she said, huh? I said, what have you heard God say in your prayer? She said, nothing. I said, oh, okay. What do you mean nothing? Like nothing as in you didn't pray, or nothing as in you didn't hear anything from him? She said, actually, to be honest, Pastor, I didn't pray. I just wanted some input and some advice. And so I encourage her to invite God into her situation, invite him into what she's going through. She said, okay, I'll do it. She went back and she prayed, and she really began to seek the Lord in her situation, and God began to give her clarity, and she made some amazing next steps in her life. But it's so often that we oversee the simplest things of saying, hey, let me invite God into this situation. We've phoned a friend, we've searched Google, we've talked to this person, and we've consulted that person, and we talked to this expert, and we networked here, but have we networked with God? Have we connected with God? Have we invited him into our situation? And so one thing that's interesting here is that they said, Jesus, they woke him up and they said, don't you care that we're about to perish? Don't you care that we're about to die? And so I find this interesting because it's a question, but it's also an accusation. I call it an accu question, right? It's a question, but in it, there's an accusation sometimes. Sometimes I'll hear my wife say, are you going to take the trash out? And it's more than a question. It's the trash has been sitting there. It should have been taken out a long time ago. It's an accurate question. So they're almost indicting Jesus with the fact that he doesn't care and that he doesn't care about them. So this fear that they had, this fear that arose in their hearts, stemmed from a place of not trusting that Jesus cared for them. Are you truly convinced right now that Jesus cares for you? I don't mean like in a very broad or very general sense, but are you convinced in your heart of hearts that Jesus truly cares about you and about your situation? See, because in the hearts of the disciples, they were panicking. They said, Jesus, don't you care we are perishing? There was an underlying issue in their hearts that they truly weren't convinced that Jesus cared for them. I think there's a very great passage that speaks of the care that Jesus has for us. And I just want to read it. It's a passage that I read often. It's etched in my heart and has spoken to me in many different ways, in many different seasons. And I believe that it will speak to you and maybe a great opportunity and a point for you to receive this passage and meditating over it and really letting it go from knowledge to revelation in your heart. It says here in Psalm 23, it says, the Lord is my shepherd. It doesn't say the shepherd. He says, my shepherd. There's a personal element of Jesus being the shepherd. And he says, I shall not be in want. He cares for you. He will provide for you. He is a caring and loving shepherd, right? And it says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He's a God that gives you peace. He's a God that leads you and guides you. And it says, and he leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Isn't this beautiful? This speaks of Jesus as being our leader, the one that cares for us, the one that protects us, the one that guides us, the one that ensures that we are not in a place of need and in a place of want, that he's caring for us, he's providing for us constantly. It's his joy and his delight to do that for your life and for my life. Are you truly convinced that Jesus cares for you? It goes on to say in verse 4, it says, yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, listen to this, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. See, the key of walking through the valleys and the storms of life without being gripped by fear is knowing that Jesus is with you. Because it says here clearly, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And so the presence of the storm does not mean the absence of the presence of Jesus. Sometimes we find ourselves in a storm or turmoil or trouble in our lives, and we feel like it's the absence of Jesus. But I tell you, beloved, there's no other closer places that Jesus is than with us when we are amidst a storm that we may be facing. And so the presence of the storm does not mean the absence of Jesus. He's with you, beloved. He's with you. He's with you to be your shepherd, that he's leading you, that he's guiding you, that he's going to protect you, that he's going to provide for you. He's your loving shepherd. And so these disciples were not convinced of that. They weren't entirely convinced of Jesus caring for them. That's why their hearts were gripped with this type of fear. And so we looked at the promise, we looked at the storm, we looked at the invitation, and now we're going to look at the decision. And so in verse 40 it says, but he said to them, why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, who can this be that even the wind and the seas obey him? I want to land here with 3 observations from this last couple of verses here. The first is Jesus says, why are you so fearful? The first is face your fear. It's important that Jesus wants you to come to terms with what it is that brings fear into your heart. What is it? Call it out. Is it your health? Is it your finance? Is it your work situation? Is it your past? Is it uncertainty? What is it? Call it out. What is it right now? Just even to yourself right now, call it out. What is that thing in your life that grips you with fear? Jesus says, why? Jesus doesn't evade what gives fear to our hearts and just looking to remove any obstacle or anything that gives us fear in our life. No, he says to come to terms with it. Why are you so fearful? So first is face your fear, whatever it is. Come to terms with it. Go head on with it. The second is he says, why are you so fearful? Why is it that you have no faith? And here, I believe it's an invitation for you to choose faith over fear. For you to choose faith over fear. See, their fear was as a result of their faith not being in place and not being appropriated in the right place. You see, whenever we have fear in our hearts, it means that our faith is appropriated in the wrong place. If we're constantly believing negative things are going to happen, then we have faith in the wrong place. And so in this, we have the opportunity to choose faith over fear. This is what Psalms 56 says. Psalm 56, verse 3 and 4, it says, the psalmist says, whenever I am afraid, and that may be you here today, whenever I'm afraid, I will trust in you. In God, I will praise his word. In God, I have put my trust. I will not fear. What can flesh do to me? You see, fear takes over our hearts when our hearts are not taken over by trust in who God is. And so he tells them to, he makes a promise to them, right? He says, let's go, let us go to the other side. And so the issue is they didn't trust in what he said to them. He didn't trust in the fact that he made a commitment to get them to the other side. And so right now, I want to just propose to you to choose faith over fear. You know, fear causes you to look at your own ability, while faith causes you to look at the ability of God. And our hearts are gripped with fear when we begin to look at our own ability. These men were in a boat, and they looked at this raft or this boat that was made by human hands as their sense of security and a sense of hope and a sense of faith. And they put that, and it began to erode, it began to come unglued by the forces of nature. And quickly fear began to hit their heart, but they didn't realize who they had in the boat with us had authority over them and the waves and the sea. And so choose now faith over fear in whatever you may be experiencing. So face your fear, choose faith over fear. Third, grow in your relationship with God. They make this interesting observation. They said, Jesus calls out peace to the storms. And they said, who can this be? Like, who is he? Who is Jesus? Who is he? They didn't have a clear understanding of who Jesus is. And so fear happens as we begin to experience fear as a result of a lack of faith, and we have a lack of faith as a result of not knowing who God is. You see, they said, who's this man that has authority of the winds and the sea? They didn't have a clear understanding of who he is. And so when you begin to come into relationship with God, we begin to release faith in God, which in turn begins to dismantle the anchors of fear that have been set up in our life. It says here in 1 John 4:18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. And so when we grow to know God, we grow to know his love. And when we grow to know his love, it begins to expel and remove this love. And when it says, but perfect love drives out fear, that word perfect means mature. It basically just means as we begin to mature in knowing of the greatness of God's love, the greatness of his compassion, the greatness of his tender love over your life and care over your life, it begins to attack the fear that grips us and that paralyzes our heart in so many different ways. So face your fear, choose faith over fear, and grow in your relationship with God. Make that commitment today. Don't just try to cast the storm away. Make sure to commit yourself to knowing who God is and how much he loves you right now. And so I remember for years I was stricken with a fear that would grip my heart for months and months and months and months, for over a year. This had gripped my heart of believing that I was gonna die in a car. I just, every time I got in a car, I was just gripped with fear in my heart that today's the day that I'm gonna die. And so that paralyzed me, that caused me to live with lots of anxiety when I got in a vehicle, and it really crippled me. But it wasn't until I began to understand the depth of God's love for me and his care for me and his tender affections for me, that when I begin to grow in his love and his care, I begin to release more and more and more trust to him. As I begin to do that, he began to infuse my heart with grace and with power to overcome these lies that came to cripple my life. Maybe that's you here today. Maybe that's you here today, and you've been plagued with fear in your heart from certain situations, certain circumstances, maybe the climate of life that we're currently in right now. And God is inviting you to trust him today. He's inviting you to allow him to care for you. He's inviting you to invite him into your life today. So will you invite him? Will you make that decision to invite him into your situation, to invite him in your circumstance? Will you invite him into your life today? I'm so honored to spend this time with y'all here today. And what I do want to do is I want to pray. I want to pray for you. I want to pray for you. I want to pray that you would step into a place of bold and courageous faith in the midst of fearful times, that you would have faith in this storm. So, Lord, I pray for each person that's listening right now, that they would step into a greater understanding of your love and of your tender affection over their life, Lord, that they would rise in faith and that fear would be crushed in their lives right now, Lord. They would step into understanding the magnitude of your love that you have for them today. Maybe you're listening today and maybe you've never made a decision for Jesus Christ. Maybe you've listened to the messages, maybe you've grown up around church, but you know in your heart that you have not made a decision. I want to invite you to make a life-changing decision today, to give your life to Jesus Christ today, to give your life unto him, to receive forgiveness of sins, and to be led into the purposes and plans that he has over your life. If that's you and you want to make that decision, we're going to have a link for you right in the description box. I want you to click that link and I want to pray with you. I want to pray a short prayer with you and be able to walk this journey out with you. And lastly, because of your generosity, as a church, we're able to impact a multitude of people, especially in this time. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for your generosity and also allow that opportunity to be extended to you right now. You'll find a text to give option right now on the screen. You'll see it pop up for you. And in addition to that, we'll have a link directly connected to our website where you can give and allow the lives of this community to continue to be impacted. Thank you, friend. I thank you that you would allow me to spend this time with you. I hope that today was meaningful and empowering to your life today. Live over fear with faith in who God is in your life. Bless you.
Hey, this is Pastor Christina.
Hey, this is Pastor Paul.
We want to take a moment right now to just say thank you for watching our latest message. We hope that it blessed you. We also want to take an opportunity to encourage you to comment in the section below and let us know what you learned from this message, how you were encouraged, and how it spoke to you in this particular season of your life. Also, while you're at it, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you could be kept updated on our newest uploads. We hope that you continue to remain blessed.